Here, I'll show everybody my face real quick, in case you don't remember who I am. The kids recognize me, even with my mask on. So my name is Clay, and Clay Steele, and I am one of the naturalists for Lee County Conservation. So I've been doing not so many programs lately for some reason, mostly a lot of this virtual stuff. So it's great to be down here at the library, and I'm excited to start getting back to schools, and it's almost field trip season, and it's almost flower season. So I'll be getting out in the yard too, which I'm super excited about. These last few weeks have been just brutal for people like me, not being able to get outside too much. I was still taking my walks, but they weren't as much fun. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about something coming up here, which is planting season. So people are really excited to get outside, especially this year. And we're going to talk about garden plants for butterflies and pollinators. And I love this little cartoon here. It's by Dean Darling. Dean Darling was an Iowa cartoonist who was actually front page of the Des Moines Register back in the day. So he has this great cartoon, Iowa as we found it. So yeah, Dean Darling was quite a famous conservationist. He hung out with even like Teddy Roosevelt. He hung out with Otto Leopold. He ran around with quite the crowd. So he did a lot of conservation-themed cartoons and comics right on the front page of the Des Moines Register. So yeah, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about prairie plants that you can plant in your yard. But first, before I do that, I'm going to need to talk to you a little bit about the prairie. Why garden for pollinators? Why do we worry about pollinators? Why is that an issue? So this is a nice little picture here of my own yard. This is a planting that I've been working on for a while here. So let's go to the next slide. There we go. So the whole basis of these native pollinator plantings in our yards is the tallgrass prairie. So prairie is French word for meadow, and it is made up of 30 different species of grasses and 250 species of forbs. So the prairie once covered most of Iowa, actually. They also have wetlands and oak savanna and woods on the edge, but they were the primary biggest part of the state. The problem in Iowa is that 99.98% of our prairie is gone. So that is a lot of habitat. That is a whole lot of habitat for pollinators and for other animals that's not there. And it's all productive cornfields and other fields now and cities and everything that we need. But the butterflies still have to figure out where they're going to find their food and everything. So let's go to the next slide here. So yeah, so the prairie once covered, you can see right here where it covered just huge parts of the country. Go to the next slide here. So right here in Iowa, if you look at this map, you can see the tan areas were prairie and the green areas were actually forest. So Iowa was almost entirely prairie. Next slide. And the tan areas in this picture are still where there's prairie. The gray areas are areas that have been developed, either in the cornfields or in the cities or in just any sort of other development. So you can see there's very little of the yellow left, not all that much of the green. All right, so we go to the next slide there. And here is Lee County. So this is Lee County before it was developed. This is Lee County, in 1825 or so. That's all the green part's forest and tan part is the prairie. Next slide shows us how much of it is in farming now. So this has a huge impact on the animals that live there, whether they're large animals like we used to have bison, or if it's the little animals like our butterflies and our bees and all of our pollinators. So that's why we start looking at our yards. What can we do? What can we do in town? Town is land. These yards we have are land that can be used for other things other than just grass. So why would we turn them into pollinator gardens? Well, food, they become food for pollinators and their young. The pollinators and like their caterpillars, the young larvae and that kind of stuff. So let's see here. There's shelter. So it's all your things of habitat. So you have food, you have shelter for the eggs and the larvae. It's a place for them to lay their eggs, and it's also a place for them to overwinter and spend the winter safely. and we need pollinators. You know, pollinators are pollinating our crops, a huge amount of our crops, pretty much all of our fruits, and a lot of our vegetables are pollinated by insects. And plus, these flower beds are just beautiful. I mean, it just looks nice, whether bees and butterflies and all that stuff even existed. Plus, they are easy to care for. They're very hardy plants, and they're made for Iowa here. So this next slide here shows us a prickly pear cactus on the left. Believe it or not, there is actually cactus that lives in Iowa, and it is growing. It's growing right on the edge of a road. This rose here is growing right on the edge of the road as well. It's a wild rose. They're just very, very hardy. And the reason that they can do that is you can look and you can see these roots that are coming down. Your lawn grass would be that second grass. It's about this deep. And that's where your yard turns brown in July or August. And if you look at your native grasses, their roots will go down 10, sometimes 15 feet underground. So these plants, they do not care if it doesn't rain for a month. It doesn't affect them all. And this is true with your prairie flowers as well. So your native plants are really, really hardy. A lot of your plants from other parts of the world aren't going to be quite as hardy. All right. So who are these pollinators that we're worried about? Well, butterflies are the low-hanging fruit. That's the one that everybody loves. They're beautiful. You know, few people are scared of them. Believe it or not, I see kids running around being chased by butterflies. But butterflies are the most popular, especially your monarch butterflies. But you also have moths, and believe it or not, bees and wasps. A lot of wasps are actually pollinators. They're not chasing people around trying to sting them like the yellow jackets and all that. In fact, most of them are these small wasps. They're stingless, and they're very important pollinators. And we have beetles. You don't think about them. And ants. And actually, I forgot it on the list, but you have flies as well. So those are actually some of the largest groups of pollinators, and plus hummingbirds. We love hummingbirds. All right, what plant should I use? Well, everybody likes milkweed, right? Well, except for some people know people who don't like milkweed. Farmers didn't used to like milkweed, and that's actually the problem. So what plant should I use? Milkweed, more milkweed, different kinds of milkweed. Some random native flowers you found on sale, in my case, and milkweed seedlings you dug up because you planted milkweed one time and it spread, and then you had little seedlings and you didn't have the heart to kill them, so you plant them all over the place. And that's why they call it milkweed. It was a weed. It popped up all over the fields. It was everywhere. Farmers fought it. For generations, they're trying to keep milkweed out of their fields. And then we invented Roundup and Roundup Ready corn. And that pretty much took care of the milkweed. It hates Roundup, very sensitive to Roundup. And milkweed is actually becoming very rare in our agricultural areas. You don't see it in the ditches like you used to. You don't see it on the edges of fields. So it's becoming more and more important for us to plant it. At the same time, there's less risk of it annoying farmers by getting into their fields because they pretty much all use Roundup. So milkweed is an extremely important one to include as part of your flower groups. All right. So we have 12 native milkweeds on this list here. We have butterfly weed. It's also called butterfly milkweed. Swamp milkweed. These are two I have in my gardens. We have common milkweed. For some reason I tried to plant common milkweed in my gardens and it never seems to survive. But it's really tough in the wild. You have a lot of other ones. You have world milkweed, which is kind of an interesting one. We have that out at the Nature Center. And there's a number of other milkweeds as well. So butterfly and swamp are the ones I have in my yard. So all the orange you see there in the picture is actually my butterfly milkweed. The swamp milkweed's in there, but it's kind of hiding in the back. It's not showing up in this picture very well. So another one that we're going to plant is a very common one is coneflowers. You have several different kinds. You have two different kinds of yellow. You have brown-headed and yellow coneflowers, and you also have the purple coneflowers as well. And they're great. They are prolific spreaders, so they're going to take up a lot of room. So it reminded me the coneflowers really reminded me, and the milkweed to some extent. So we talked about native plants. They're really, really hardy. So in your garden, you're going to want to think about, do you want a formal garden or do you want a wild garden? Mine, I kind of go for a wild look, but believe it or not, if you look underneath it, it is actually very formal. It's very balanced. It's very organized. I tend to plant things mirroring themselves, and then it all just goes wild, and it gets out of control. One important thing to remember with these plants is you want to plant them in clumps. So you're going to want to plant, like with milkweed, one monarch caterpillar will eat the entire plant sometimes, especially if it only has one plant. You're going to want to plant 2, 3, 4 of these milkweed all next to each other, so the caterpillar can travel around. That way it doesn't decimate any one plant, and it doesn't run out. So the last thing you want it to do is run out of food halfway through growing. So you want to plant in clumps, and that's actually just a landscaping trick, where you just have big clumps of color, and that looks good. Some of these plants are going to want to make big clumps completely by themselves, which is something to keep in mind. You want to plant a variety of flower colors and shapes, because different insects are attracted to different colors. Some like purple, some like yellow. So you're going to see a range of different colors, and you want to mix those colors up, and you want a variety of different kinds of flowers, because you have long-tongued butterflies and short-tongued butterflies, and same thing with bees, and with all these and certain beetles and stuff, they can only use certain size and types of flowers. So you want a whole variety. And you're going to want to really research your bloom times, your height, your width, your light, and how these things spread. Some bloom times is important because you want things that are blooming, so there's always something blooming. I planted these 2 plants, they're the same color. They were, and actually you can see the little yellow one there. It's in the bottom, right, kind of in the middle, bottom left. And it's yellow, and then there was a yellow one on the right. Well, they bloom about 2 weeks off of each other, so they're never bloom at the same time, which is I wanted them blooming at the same time. So yeah, I couldn't quite get that controlled as much. I also, with height, I very carefully put all my high plants in the back. I researched that, but I did not think about the fact that some of them get high first. So some of them shot up really high and then flopped over on top of everything else. And then there's others that got really high, but only later in the year, and then they were trying to squeeze their way up. So I didn't really figure this in. I was just looking at height. These both get 5 feet high. So you really want to kind of look how fast they're going to grow. Do a little research. Make sure things are getting enough light. If you have trees that are going to be blocking it, and also how it spreads. If you look there on the, there's a type of bee balm I have there on the left. Those bright kind of hot pink ones. Beautiful, but it spreads by rhizome. I knew they didn't self-seed. I didn't want them self-seeding all over everything. I planted these ones and found out later they spread by rhizomes, and it's forming this huge clump that's spreading and spreading out. And I'm going to actually, they say, well, you got to dig it up every couple of years and divide it. And I didn't know that when I planted it, so I'm going to have to dig it up. So these are good things to do your research on. All right, so we'll look again at some more plants here. Like with coneflowers, I found out coneflowers do the same thing. They make these big clumps and they spread and they spread. And I've seen yards that just have huge, giant clumps of coneflowers, which is really impressive looking. But if you're trying to keep them in a small bed with other flowers, it's something to keep in mind is that they are going to want to spread. Here's some other ones, gray-headed and yellow, all right. And purple prairie clover. That's a really important one. I just kind of threw in some random ones here because there's 250 of these flowers I could have showed you. They're all a pollinator for something. And a lot of them, you can plant, you can find them. There's just so many of them out there. So purple prairie clover is one. I actually, if you look at my yard, sometimes you'll see I have a lot of that, just your yard weed clover, and it's always covered in bees. So they love that stuff. Goldenrod, that's an important one. We'll just go through these real quick. Blazing star, prairie smoke, rattlesnake master, great one. It sometimes gets a little tall though. Wild bergamot, bee balm. You notice they look very similar because they are related plants. Black-eyed Susan, yep, false white indigo. Spiderwort, I love spiderwort. We have that out at the Nature Center, and I have that one.
Sorry.
And I have that one at home as well. We'll go back here. I want to show you some other stuff.
Yeah,
Go back.
clicked
Go back
too.
one more.
I'm getting my left and my right.
Use the arrows. That helps. There we go. Spiderwort. Yeah, I love Spiderwort. I'll show you in the pictures. I have some Spiderwort in my beds as well. All right, next one, Prairie Sunflower. I've got Prairie Sunflower. This is one I found out. Even though I planted it in the back, it's very heavy, and it flops over everything, and it grew up fast and quick, and I'm really kind of wish I don't know. I love it because it's still doing so well, but I wish it would stand up a little better on its own. And in the wild, it's a prolific cedar. I haven't really had any problems with it in my yard. Compass plant is related to sunflowers. Not always a good one. If you have a big yard, this would be a great one. I would love to have a compass plant in my yard. Hard one to find. This plant will live for 100 years or more, and it sends roots down sometimes 25 feet in the ground. And then to save on moisture, it actually points all its leaves north and south so that they don't get the brunt of the afternoon sun. They just get morning and afternoon sun. And that keeps them from losing too much water in the hot prairies. There's just no shade out there. And you could use them as a compass. You always knew at least which way north and south was. We just go, I love this plant. I've never been able to find it in a greenhouse anywhere. But it does grow in our ditches around here. I see it. It grows outside the nature center. All right, and we don't want to forget the grasses either. The grasses are important. Actually, some butterflies actually do use grasses a little bit. Most of them are wind pollinated, but the butterflies will use them a little bit, and they're great habitat. They're great. They provide great structure to your garden. They make really good winter interest. They're beautiful all winter long, and they're a good habit, a good place for the butterflies and stuff to hide. So I have some big blue stem like we saw there in my garden. I also have a little blue stem in my garden. I'll show you that too. All right, the next one I have is Cytodes grama. I have that in my garden as well. That's another smaller one. Little blue stem and Cytodes grama are a little bit smaller. Big blue stem gets a little bit taller and skinny. All right, there we go. My yard. So that's back to my bed again. On the bottom left, you can see some spiderwort. On the bottom right, you see the little blue stem. You can see some white coneflower in there. That's actually a cultivar. It's not it's a native, but it's a cultivar to make it white. You can see the wild sunflowers. You can see some orange milkweed on the bottom left, and that bee balm in the back, the red bee balm. So that's really filled out nicely. That was, well, let me show you. I'll show you what that was when I moved in. That was my yard. When I moved in 2014, the family had lived there. The guy was an amazing gardener, huge raised bed that went from the house all the way back to the alley. He gardened a lot. After he passed away, it wasn't gardened anymore. They didn't do much landscaping. It had this huge garden, but not a lot of landscaping. So once the garden was grass, everything was grass. And one of the big trees died, and actually that smaller tree is dead now too, and taken out of there. So I got to work right away, planting trees and flowers and bushes. So we'll show the next picture there. And this picture was taken in 2013 during the drought summer. So it just looks terrible. This is my yard now, or actually last year, looking down on it. You can see the difference there. And I'll show some close-ups. You can do the next one there. And I planted some nice barriers, just kind of trying to give it a little bit of privacy and a little bit of structure. There we go. So that is, yeah, go back again.
Sorry.
Maybe we'll use the arrow usually goes back, or it doesn't
I
work
have
on
to
this
find
one.
them. I forgot about the arrows.
Okay. So yeah, so you can see the difference. There was actually some little ties there that showed that somebody planted some annuals there probably, and but there wasn't anything else. And I got busy. This is the second bed. I planted some non-native stuff there. Didn't like it. Tore it all out. Planted this in a few years ago. And this is actually only this will be its third year, believe it or not. That was after 2 years of growing. So that really came in. And this is a different direction. So I'm going to show you these as they progress through the years. So this is early on. Like I planted this the previous year. This is earlier in the spring. Everything's coming up. It's a nice little clump that hasn't gotten tall yet, but you can really see where I planted everything. That light green one's the spiderwort. There's some non-natives in there, that I have because I take peat plants wherever I can find them. And a lot of your flowers will be used by the pollinators. Sometimes they're not used as much, but they will use them still. So, and here we are a little bit later. The spiderwort starting to bloom. Show you the next picture. Things are getting a little bit taller there. That blue stem's starting to pop up. Now you'll notice like you still don't see the big blue stem or even the cytosgrama. Those do not come up until much later in the summer. So they don't show up until almost August really before they get tall enough to be seen. All that little blue stem shows up right away. Now you're starting to see that big blue stem way in the back on the left is starting to come up. Spiderwort's done flowering, and some of your other flowers are starting to pop up. The sunflowers are starting to get tall enough now, they're flopping forward. Now the milkweed, go back one more again.
I don't know. I just can't find my arrow. Okay, I've lost my arrow.
Use the arrow key maybe.
There we go.
So,
Oh, God. Okay.
yeah.
That's gonna be so.
That's what I was
easier.
using when I was playing with it earlier. Yeah, so it's getting huge here. This is like almost right when I would consider it at its prime. The grasses are starting to pop up, but the sunflower, it's starting to flop over a little bit, but it hasn't completely taken over yet. And this was really, the milkweed is actually coming in. You can start to see some of those orange flowers in the back left. This was really nice. I think this is probably in July or so, or maybe August. By August, it was starting to get it was a little bit fuller than I wanted. I'm going to try and thin it out a little bit next year, I think, and restructure it this spring. So I'm pretty excited to get back out there. And you can see as we went in the fall, it still provides great winter interest. You know, I leave this in here all winter because a lot of larvae and a lot of eggs are on those plants. There's larvae, they're hibernating underneath the litter. And there's actually a lot of eggs on those plants. So if you cut all this down in the fall and take it off to the landfill, you're actually removing all the insects that we're hoping to overwinter in there. They're going to have to start over from scratch next year. Whereas the way I have mine, this messy garden, they're actually going to still be there in the spring. They'll get going. I'll come in then, cut out all the dead stuff, haul that off, and they'll already be there. All their little hatchlings will be there and stuff. So you can see the next picture shows, this was last year, I cut everything down and pulled it out of there. So it looks terrible there for a little while, but at least I didn't look like that all winter. That doesn't look any better than when I moved in. So that's not the only bed I did. This was part of the raised bed that goes back behind the garage. This was just a square of grass when I moved in. And I planted a red bud in the back there. I planted a bunch of marigolds. They're not native and they're an annual, but they're great for pollinators. They're really, really good for pollinators. So I planted a ton of those. They're all mixed in there. And this is a working flower bed. The back left shows it actually has 2 huge tomato plants in it, which actually there are native butterflies that will love to eat your tomato plants. The tomato hornworm is actually that's the sphinx moth. It's a moth, but it is a native. It's a native insect, and it wants your plants, but that's not its fault. It has to eat something. And I actually have some pot parsley in there too, which is a good one too. So go to the next one. This is looking back at the yard again. You can see those tomatoes there. Right towards us, under the tomatoes, is a whole bunch of parsley I planted. And the swallowtails, the black swallowtail in particular, really likes parsley. It likes dill, you know. And I think there's some other stuff too. One of the sheets has those garden plants that you can put in there. So even my garden is working as part of this. I just plant everything in between. I had to find somewhere for the tomatoes. I get excited with flowers. I start planting too many flowers and too many trees, and I start forgetting about my tomatoes. You got to rotate your tomatoes. So you got to leave blank spaces for them. That's what the marigolds are for. So the marigolds fill in the areas that I'm not using for tomatoes this year. All right. This is the same garden, but it's looking from the alley. This is a place where people park their cars. It's really highly visible. It's not anything to look at. So I actually took this old, not good looking fence and covered it with a native honeysuckle vine, which hummingbirds absolutely love. Bees love it too. The hummingbirds really love it. It actually would like it if that fence was twice as tall as it is, because it tends to start flopping over. But as you can see, it almost makes a shrub-like effect, and it really hides my working area. It hides my compost bins and all the junk back there that you can't see.
If you're looking for native honeysuckle, do you know like what specific one to look for to make sure it's native?
Most of your honeysuckle vines are going to be native.
Okay.
There is a honeysuckle bush that's not.
Okay.
That's the one that you find growing in the woods. But a lot of your honeysuckle vines, sometimes called trumpet honeysuckle. And I think I forgot to put, I was going to put a little picture of the flower on there. They get really pretty, like orange and or pink flowers on them. And I have one that grows just like crazy, and I have another one I just can't seem to get going. I don't know what the difference is, but it's a nice native. I also the other side of the fence actually also has native clematis growing on it. So I'm just trying to hide this old chain link fence. It doesn't even really do anything. I just never took it out. And I have a bunch of sedum and different things growing at the bottom, just trying to soften the edges of what's otherwise a bunch of concrete in a working garden. And I'm providing habitat while I'm doing it. This is the same area in the spring. That red bud's in full bloom here, and it's a pollinator. It's one of those early spring pollinators. Really getting these insects are really, especially the bees, are really hungry in spring, and they're desperate for flowers. So they're gonna love this red bud. And on the plus side, I have lots of red buds I can transplant to our parks. On the downside, I have lots of red buds that I either get to execute or I have to transplant. So it's not as bad as I thought it would be. This is another area that was just a blank corner. I'm trying to kind of just block the road a little bit with that, but it has a magnolia in the back, forsythia on the right. Those are not natives. Well, magnolias do have there's some native in them that have been hybridized. The forsythia is not, but these both can help out some insects. Forsythia not as much with our North American insects, but it's a very early bloomer and it's pretty. And the next picture shows you it still makes good habitat. This is great for birds and other things too. It just fills out nicely. All right. And in the middle of this is the corner. This was another blank corner. Bunch of hostas in there. They don't do much except feed the slugs. But in the middle is a serviceberry, and that's a native shrub that gets berries for the birds, but it also has flowers for the pollinators in the spring. And that'll get to be 10, 12 feet tall and wide, and it'll just fill out that corner. It's far enough in the house, it won't touch anything. And give me a little privacy. See, it does stuff for me and for the animals too. And this is the other side of the porch. And I've got some some natives in there, not as many, but I have some hydrangeas and a holly in there as well. And there's a magnolia on the right. And I actually have I do have some wildflowers tucked in there that aren't blooming yet. It's just good habitat. So in my yard is not big enough because it's a real tight urban lot. And the backyard doesn't have I don't have the right access to it to put in a rain garden. Rain gardens are essentially what I do with native plantings and flowers, except that you can direct your downspouts to them. And somehow I've seen big old houses where they've done this in a big side yard, have made a large rain garden and have all their downspouts directed to it. And essentially what it is a very shallow pond, but it's designed to not hold water. So instead of that water just flushing into the street, which is where it ends up, and washing across your yard and just filling up our storm drains, my street fills with a foot of water every time it rains. I can't leave my car out there with the doors flood. And that's right in the middle of town. And so if you can prevent that kind of stuff with something that can hold that flood water, and I'd love to be able to do that in my backyard, and I don't have the right situation or the money right now to do it, but it's all wildflowers that can handle being in dry areas and also can handle being underwater for a little while. And what it is you dig out an area and you backfill it with very porous soil, and then you plant your wildflowers in that and direct your water to it and give it a sort of an overflow, outflow. So it'll slowly let your water soak in and slowly let it out over the period of a day rather than in just the few minutes of the rainfall. And we did this at work. So we did this at the Nature Center because we had the room and it was a really good experiment to see, even though we don't need it as much because we have sandy soil, but we wanted to do an example. So I'll show you some quick pictures of that. Here's our guy, John, digging it out. And so he dug out with that backhoe, he dug out this hole. And the first thing he did after he got done digging out the hole is it rained, and it rained a lot, and it rained some more. This is hooked up to a downspout. There's actually a pipe coming up, and this is hooked up to a downspout on one side of our building. And our building puts off a lot of water. Now that it's actually been there for a while, it doesn't hold water as long. It's gotten much more porous and it lets the water soak down. Initially, it was still pretty packed from his tractor. So that's what it looked like. Doesn't look like much there. Once it dried out though, I'll show you can show the next picture. we actually have two of them. There's a huge one, and this is the smaller one. We actually got busy. It's backfilled now with soil. Oh, go back again. And we mulched it, and I actually spray painted clumps. I painted everything in clumps, and using ground paint, I painted that. We put flags, we marked everything, and then we bought about 4 billion little seedlings that us and like 20 volunteers actually spent days sticking into the ground. And this area is starting to look a lot different now. So this is the other one. The one you saw completely filled with water, that's what this one is. We actually replanted thousands of more plants last year, trying to get more variety in there. Because not everything survived, because it's a brutally hot area around our nature center.
What's the white stuff down front?
The white stuff is yarrow.
Okay.
Yeah, and yarrow apparently spreads, which is good because we need things to spread. Anything that survives in our very, very dry rain garden is wonderful, and I will take it. So you can actually see some purple coneflower in there as well. Joe Pye weed in the middle, that's a good one. And then we found this swallowtail hanging out in our garden. It's always covered in monarchs. Every year it's monarchs. There's swallowtails in there. There's sphinx moths that we find in there. It is just full of butterflies all summer long. And it's a huge stopover for the monarchs in the fall when they're migrating and looking for food. We always find them out there. All right. So here's a picture of your backyard next summer after you plant 10,000 acres. But this is it's a really nice native prairie. So I think that is all I have. And people can ask me some questions if you want. And you don't have to worry about remembering all the plants. I just touched on them. I was talking really fast. I had a lot of pictures to get through. These sheets will give you more information that you could ever want. This is everything you would need to know about all the different plants you can put in your yard.
Do you happen to know, we have a question, do you happen to know the botanical names for the bee balm and bergamot you showed?
Yeah, Monarda.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know that many of them, but that's one I do know. Monarda.
Do you know which one is the Monarda?
The red one is Monarda is part of the mint family, I think. Both bee balm and bergamot, I think, have Monarda as their first part there. And there's different bee balms. There's the purple, and then there's the red bee balm. And the purple spreads like crazy from seeds, whereas the red bee balm does not spread so much by seeds, but it spreads by rhizomes. So they both have different, and it grows much taller too, I found out. It's gorgeous though. I mean, man, you should see the butterflies and bees and stuff on it. Bees don't even bother me. I go out there and work, and they're so busy feeding, they don't even pay attention to me. And I'm kind of allergic to them. So yeah, if you look up Monarda, that'll show you a lot of things. And I think these sheets, some of these will have it. I know that's the thing is these names, the common names will throw you off a lot of times. People call everything, and I wanted to mention too that you actually don't forget about things like trees as well. Trees are huge for butterflies. People don't even think about it. Like I planted a tulip tree, which it gets these flowers. About 20 years, it'll start to get these big yellow-green flowers on it, kind of look tulipy, or the leaf looks like a tulip too. But the swallowtail, actually, their caterpillars use the leaves for food. So, a lot of the trees I even planted, and there you can see them in the pictures. I didn't point them out, but they're great. They would be considered pollinator plantings, except they're actually trees. So yeah, there's a lot of information out there. You can call me up and ask any questions out at the Lee County Conservation Department, or email me. I can direct you to the right person.
Do you have any recommended sources for finding native plants specifically?
Yeah, I had Iowa City Landscaping has a ton of native plants. They're a little pricier, but they're going to have what you want. You can find some sales at the end of the year. That tends to be what I do is go in, because they'll tend to have some of that stuff left over. The other place, just because it's Iowa City and there's a lot of interest in native plantings, I actually go to the Hy-Vee drugstore greenhouse up in Iowa City. Always just has tons and tons of stuff, especially late spring when they're trying to get rid of it. You can pick up a bunch of stuff. And even the local, like Keokuk seems to have will have a lot of random things too. And you never know what you're going to find at like Lowe's or whatever. But the thing is, you got to be careful with the ones from, especially the big box stores, is they may not be native. If they are native, they may be a variety that comes from farther south and won't survive the winter. And sometimes they actually treat them systemically with a pesticide, which is not what you want that first year. So they're trying to get it to survive that first year by killing every insect that eats it. And that's not necessarily something you want if you're planting for insects. So, but you don't always know that, but that is the case sometimes. And there's a lot of smaller greenhouses. So, there's the one over across the river in Illinois. He has a lot of stuff, especially shrubs. You can learn a lot of your native shrubs are commonly used as landscaping stuff, and they have a lot of good flowers on them. Yeah, so you start to learn your plants. Once you learn your plants, and then you walk around and you start looking for things on sale. You just always got your eyes on them. Then you buy them, and then you have all these plants, and you're like, oh, what am I going to do with this 5-foot flower? I don't really have a place for a 5-foot flower, but I guess I'll just stick it here in the back. And that's what I end up doing. Is just you make a new bed, and then you run out of yard. It's a lot of fun. And then you dig it all up because you messed up. And you got to do it again. I can't tell how many trees and shrubs I've moved 2 or 3 times. And you can do a lot of these too in pots and stuff. So if you're living in an apartment, there's a lot of little things you can do in pots. I have grasses in pots. I have milkweed I've put in great big huge pots, and they actually get a lot of action too.
Were your tomatoes in pots, or were they just in cages?
They were just in cages.
Okay.
Great big huge cages that they're trying to crush.
And you mentioned rotating your tomatoes, and that's because if you plant them in the same space every year, there's a virus, isn't there?
Yeah, there's diseases that you can get in. So just like there's insects trying to eat it, there's different funguses and viruses and all kinds of things trying to get your plants, and that the stuff it'll live in the soil. So, but you want to rotate. You don't want to plant tomatoes in the same place more than once every 3rd year. So you need 3 spots for your tomatoes. So I usually plant 2 big tomatoes. So I try to have 3 different spots I can move them back and forth from, so that gives it time for that soil, the disease to die in the soil. So it doesn't affect it. You don't, because once you get that tomato blight, your neighbors can spray. If you get it in your neighborhood because you don't rotate and it starts spreading to all your neighbors, they won't know why, but all their tomatoes will be dying all the time. And they'll never know why. It's because you weren't rotating your tomatoes. And the tomato group includes eggplant and potatoes and peppers. Oh. So they're all in the same.
Bell peppers?
Bell peppers, hot peppers.
Interesting.
Yeah. And they're all in tomatillos. They're all in the same nightshade family. Okay. And you don't want to keep putting them in the same spot. So if you want to plant all those things, you're going to need an even bigger yard. and potatoes too. Potatoes are also in the same family. So I should have left more room in my garden for that, and I did not do that. I got excited and I filled it up with flowers that I don't have the heart to kill now because they're so pretty.
Well, there's a Fort Madison plant swap Facebook that someone just started up about a month ago. Yeah, so join that.
I might have some stuff to swap.
And then you don't have to kill them.
Yes. Yep, I'm always digging up little things. I'll be like, oh, look, a little butterfly milkweed popped up over here in the hostas. We'll be moving you.
Any questions?
Cool.
Thank you very much, Clay.
You
that
bet,
was
no
very
problem.
informative.